Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives and those of our children. I'm your host, Richard Wolf. I want to remind you, as always, that Charlie, our volunteer, is ready and waiting to take your ideas, suggestions, proposals for whatever might make this program better. You can reach Charlie by email at charlie.info438@gmail.com. And as always, we remind you that we really do have a companion volume to these programs, a book that goes into greater detail than we can do in this program to understand the capitalist system, which is in a way what we explore as it evolves and changes its impacts on our lives. So if you're interested, I urge you to take a look at this new book, just released in the last few months, called Understanding Capitalism. I wrote it to work with this book, the book with this program. And you can find out all the information you might be interested in about the book at our website, democracyatwork.info. Today, we're going to be talking about the remarkable statements by the president-elect, or the president by the time this reaches you, about taking over parts or maybe even all of Canada, Mexico, Greenland, Panama. We're going to be talking today about the Canadian and the Mexican adventures that he's proposing. We're also going to be talking a good bit about the drug trade and the economics of that, because that's part of the excuse Mr. Trump is using for his foreign adventures. We're also going to be talking about a new phenomenon in the United States when worker co-ops are also unionized. Unions building co-ops, co-ops building unions. What's that all about? And it now affects a rapidly growing number of American businesses. And then finally, we will talk about a remarkable new addition to the BRICS nations in the world, because a few days ago, one of the major economies of the world joined the BRICS as a full partner, namely Indonesia, and that's an important piece of information I'm going to talk to you about. So let's jump right in. Mr. Trump has threatened Mexico. He has threatened to impose tariffs on goods coming into the United States from Mexico. And he has also promised might even be a better word, to deport millions of people living in the United States back into Mexico from which they entered the United States. And I want to talk to you about what the economics of this are, and I thought it might be useful to divide them into what the impact of such activities, if Mr. Trump is able to carry them through, a very much an open question. The leader of Mexico has said none of it is going to happen, so she's been very clear about that. But we'll see. But I wanted to show you what the economics would be for both Mexico and the United States. So let's start with Mexico. There, I think it's fair to say that if Mr. Trump carries this out, the effects on Mexico will be more than negative. They will be disastrous. Here in the United States, they'll be short of disastrous, but they'll be negative also. So I'll leave it to you to try to understand why Mr. Trump would be pushing these ideas. So let's go. First with Mexico. Mexico relies on something economists call remittances. That's a portion of the income earned by people who are Mexican by birth, who are now in the United States, living and working here, but who save money and send a portion of their earnings back home to their families, many of whom are still living in Mexico. Put together, since we're talking 10 to 15 million people, this is an enormously important income for the whole country, not just for the people who get it, but those people who get that remittance then go to the local village where they live or the city where they live and spend that money, generating income for lots of others. They will lose some or all of this very bad for Mexico. Number two, one of the advantages of the North American Free Trade Association, NAFTA, were the deal made by Mexico, Canada, and the United States precisely to allow goods and services to flow freely among these three countries to the advantage of all of them, which is why all of them got together, wrote that agreement, signed that agreement, revised that agreement under Mr. Trump, by the way, who signed the agreement knowing full well that the wages in Mexico being much lower than those in the United States, it would be an invitation to companies to set up, not in the United States, but in Mexico, because they could pay lower wages and without a cost other than transportation, ship whatever they produced in Mexico into the United States without any worry of a tariff. Mr. Trump is proposing to violate that agreement, which he signed, in order to deprive Mexico of being able to ship lots of goods into the United States without paying a tariff. He's going to hit them with a tariff. They won't be able then to export without a tariff. That means Americans buying Mexican goods, for example, automobiles produced in Mexico, and there's lots of them, the price of those will go up because you'll have to pay the tariff, which is a tax on top of whatever it costs to pay for the car's production itself. Wow. Here's a double whammy. The Mexicans are going to throw huge numbers of people out of work because they can't sell the same goods in the United States at a higher price because Americans have to pay the tax, the tariff that their president is imposing on them. And of course, if you drive up the costs of vehicles coming in from Mexico, who are a major portion of vehicles on the road in the United States, you're going to worsen inflation here, which you're not supposed to do. It was the inflation that helped elect Mr. Trump, and now he's doing something that'll worsen it here. Investments won't go to Mexico the way they have because they won't have the tariff-free entree into the United States. And of course, if we deport people, we're sending millions of people back into Mexico just as they are laying off people because the tariff hurts their exports, which means they're going to have an unemployment problem beyond anything we can even imagine. And with all these companies cutting back, with all these unemployed coming in, they're going to need things to help them through this awful period, just as fewer taxes are paid to the Mexican government. You put it all together, it's a disaster for Mexico. And for the United States, it's no fun either. First of all, with millions of Mexicans and Central Americans deported, a huge number of jobs are going to be open. Those people were working, the overwhelming majority, but they were working at the worst jobs in the country, the lowest paid. It's a very open question whether millions of Americans are going to want to have the jobs being vacated by deported immigrants. So there may be a real shortage of jobs. And you know what that'll do? A shortage of people to fill low-wage jobs. It'll mean native-born Americans will have to fill those jobs, and they will demand, because they're used to it, higher wages. And if those employers want workers, they're going to have to pay those wages. And we all know what those employers are going to do if they have to pay higher wages to American native-born workers. They're going to raise their prices. Inflation again. American companies that were making a profit bringing Mexican goods into the country, they're going to lose that business. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, the government here in the United States will get more revenue, the tariffs. But you know what else has to be figured in? Every country, every company around the world is realizing that the United States is now on one of these America First crusades. It's not safe to do trade with the United States. They may cut you off at any moment by hitting your product with a tariff. Better look for markets elsewhere. Better focus your future elsewhere. The damage to the American economy from all of this, incalculable, except that we know big time. So, yeah, Mr. Trump is eager to be the president with a tough guy who can slam foreigners, deport them, hit them with a tariff. It looks good politically. Economically, a big fat disaster. On December 18th of 2024, workers at the Baltimore, Maryland coffee shop Common Ground Cafe voted to join a union, the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 27. What makes this remarkable is that the cafe was already a worker co-op. What we're beginning to see is that co-ops and unions are coming closer and closer together. A few years ago, the United Steelworkers, a big union here in the United States, took the lead and made deals with the worker co-op known as Mondragon, the big worker co-op in Spain. And they brought that concept here to the United States. And we now have a whole bunch of unionized worker co-ops. And the reason is not far to search for. Unions have a century or more of experience struggling with employers, getting rights, privileges, power for workers. It's information invaluable to anyone trying to form a worker co-op. And unions can help worker co-ops realize their dream. But worker co-ops, in a sense, can do something for unions. First of all, worker co-ops have their members join unions. They don't see them as enemies the way corporations do. So it'll be easier to organize people into unions if they are co-ops. But you know, the union does work for the workers, has to struggle against the bosses, the co-op, which is always undercutting them. That doesn't happen when you have a worker co-op, because the co-op members who make the decisions and the union members are the same people. There isn't a fight among them. They may have their disagreements, but it's a disagreement of people who have the same position. They don't just work at the enterprise, they run it. And that is what unionists have always dreamed of as the ultimate of what they're striving to achieve. There's a natural basis for a unionization of worker co-ops and labor unions, and that's being realized here in the United States. We've come to the end of the first half of today's show. Please stay with us. I think you'll find the second half even more interesting. Friends, as you know, any project like this takes money, and we don't want to bore you or burden you. On the other hand, you, our audience, are the source of our funding, and we wouldn't have it any other way. If you can, please consider making a donation. It will be enormously appreciated. Welcome back, friends, to the second half of today's economic update. I want to turn now to the drug trade, the enormous business, billions and billions of dollars of buying and using and seeking medical attention around taking drugs, legal and illegal, but particularly the vast illegal drug trade. And the United States, it should be understood, is the number one country in the world creating the demand for drugs that then fuels, of course, all of the activity around the world to grow them, to manufacture them, to ship them, and to collect the money in payment. American officials like to blame other countries, and the other countries in turn point the finger right at the United States, saying if you didn't have the enormous demand and the willingness to pay an enormous amount of money, there would be no trade in drugs. So don't blame us. Look first to your own situation. And that's what I want to do with you. I want to talk about the economics of taking drugs and buying them and spending all that money and doing such damage along the way. So first, and in no order of importance, here are the things to keep in mind. We live in a society in which drug companies spend a fortune on promoting drugs. It's very important that people understand that for many of our mental health issues that in other societies are handled by psychological interventions, therapies of all kinds, it's a very important issue for the pharmaceutical companies to persuade you otherwise, to make you think of your depressed feelings, of your anxieties, as being chemical issues that can be solved by a chemical that you take injected or by mouth or whatever form. It's a constant promotion, a constant advertising to seek in a pill the solution to problems that are psychological and probably much better handled by your mind and your body in ways other than taking dangerous chemicals into your system. Right alongside of that, there are very poor controls. Drug companies are allowed to fund professors who do studies that show drugs are good, not addictive, okay to take. Do they have to identify themselves? Not at all in any systematic way. So we have very poor control over drugs, which makes them, of course, more widely turned to. Then we have another kind of ideology in America, that when you go to work, you really shouldn't think about the workplace as anything you need to have control over. No, we are taught our job is to go to work, which is really not pleasant. But the payoff is we get money that allows us to go to the mall or to the pizza joint after work. We compensate ourselves for the horror of work by having shopping as its reward. You know, you could think otherwise. You could say that those hours of the day, 5 days a week, the best hours of the day, you're at work. And it is important for your mental health that the job conditions be good for you, give you time off, give you some leisure, give you some interesting things to do, rather than working at the pace that now has become famous in that Amazon warehouse where every step is promoted, where you actually have aspirin and other drugs available for workers who get stressed out by the conditions of their job. That's creating a market for drugs. Of course it is. They don't tell you that because they want to hide that. They want you to think the drug is a good, reasonable solution for your problem. Then there are all the cutbacks about coverage. Your insurance, medical insurance, won't cover very many sessions with a therapist, or maybe any at all. And so you hesitate to turn. You want the quick fix, the easy fix, the affordable fix. So you go to the drugs. And we know what medical insurance companies do. They deny you coverage every chance they get. That's how they become millionaires. That's how United Healthcare became so successful. And that's how their CEO lost his life when someone said, "No more of this." These are all signs of what drive people to drugs. And it's too costly, the therapy, for many, whether it's covered or more often not covered. And then we don't give the older people in our society the kind of retirement that would relax them, would give them the leisure, so they wouldn't need to turn to the drugs. And then we have that final phenomena, the older people who don't get enough money to live on Social Security. So guess what? They go to the doctor, they get pain medications, and they sell them to the illegal drug mechanisms in our society that are everywhere, so they can be resold at a profit by those who make their living in that. We have a whole host of institutions that produce the demand for drugs more in this country than anywhere else. We are at base a major cause of the drug trade. Our politicians like to present themselves as the great enemies of the drug trade. Mr. Trump is going to smite Mexico and Canada and Panama, and part of the reason is to fight the drug trade. That's a fight the United States has been waging for the last half century. And you know what? Unsuccessful would be the nicest way to describe all of the efforts by Republicans and Democrats alike. Blaming the Mexicans won't make any more difference than all the blaming of other people that has prevented looking at all the ways our society subsidizes, supports, and promotes people turning to drugs, spending fortunes of money, and thereby fueling the drug trade. Next, I want to turn to what Mr. Trump is threatening Canada with. He suggests Canada could be a 51st state. He threatens Canada. He pushes. He bullies. And the Canadians don't know what to make of it. They had little clue that this was coming. They too signed the NAFTA agreement with Mexico and the United States. They all knew what they were doing. No one held a gun to anyone's head. The treaty has been in effect for many, many, many years. Mr. Trump is making a political issue. He hopes it'll help his standing among people. So let's be interested a little bit in this, in the economics of it. First of all, Canada has been an extraordinarily loyal U.S. ally. It is persecuting the Chinese every way it knows how. It has been gung-ho to support the U.S. in Ukraine. What's the basis for worrying about this country? And, it has only sold to the United States what it has in abundance, which is basically fuel, oil and gas, and so on. It's not been a burden. There's no flood of Canadian immigrants to exaggerate. None of that. And then we had that spectacle right after the election. The Prime Minister in Canada, Mr. Trudeau, flies to Florida to get down on one or maybe both knees to say, "Don't worry, we love you, Mr. Trump." After which the Canadian people bounced Mr. Trudeau right out of office, since they have no interest, none that anyone can point to, in becoming the 51st state. Let me remind you, Canada has a national health guarantee, a single payer health insurance program, the likes of which Americans have been fighting for but been unable to achieve. You think the Canadians are eager to become one of the states in a country that doesn't have that kind of health insurance? Think again if you thought that it might be true. It isn't. You think the Canadians, who get all kinds of supports for their families, for their public education, are eager to go to a society which is very poor on those things and becoming poorer on them under Trump? Not likely. And then there are people who actually take seriously that they are a separate country and are no more eager to become part of another country than Americans are eager to become part of some other country. Moreover, where will it stop? Will we next want to propose to Britain and France and Italy and Germany that they become additional states? Are we headed in that direction? No, I don't think so. I think this is Mr. Trump's effort to promote unity inside the United States around himself, to come up with something he can hopefully parlay into the support of millions. You know why? Because he won the election by very little, 1.5%. That's all. A very small shift of voters, and he would have lost. He talks about a mandate. Why? Because he doesn't have one. And you maybe can make up by talking about it for the lack of it in reality, something Mr. Trump is something of a specialist. Making believe because you can't face the reality, that's become an American phenomena, right up there with apple pie and baseball. And nothing illustrates this better than our last topic for today. In the early days of January 2025, a country called Indonesia became a full partner of the BRICS. And the coverage of that fact in the United States was so minimal that I have to bring it up to you now because of its importance. Indonesia has a population just around 280 million people. It's one of the biggest countries in the world. It's only slightly smaller than the United States. They have 280, we have 330. An enormous country joining an economic alliance led by Russia and China is big news because it shows that the global south, of which Indonesia is a major part, is continuing to move massively away from the United States and its allies in the G7 towards the alternative global bloc. To underreport that the way we have in this country is more make-believe. You don't like what's happening, so you pretend it isn't. You make sure most of your people don't know much about it or why it matters. It's a desperate effort to change the reality because the reality is leaving the United States behind. And that is the most important thing we as a nation need to face. So denying it is no solution at all. Thank you for your attention, and as always, I look forward to speaking with you again next week.